Part 1. The message came to Earth on a Tuesday morning, and it changed everything. Doctor was drinking her third cup of coffee when her screen lit up with an urgent notification. She worked at the Unified Science Directorate, the organization that handled all of humanity's scientific dealings with the alien species of the galaxy. Most days were boring. She studied old ruins and dead civilizations, trying to understand species that had turned to dust before Earth's sun was even born. But this message was not boring at all. The Galactic Research Council wanted to give money to human scientists. A lot of money. More money than any human research team had ever received from alien sources. And they wanted humans to study something called the mysteries. Read the message 3 times. She put down her coffee and read it again. Then she walked to her supervisor's office and showed him the screen without saying a word. He read it and sat down heavily in his chair. "This has to be a mistake," he said. But it was not a mistake. The Galactic Research Council was made up of 17 of the oldest and most powerful species in the galaxy. These were civilizations that had been traveling between stars when humans were still learning to make fire. They had technology that seemed like magic. They had knowledge that filled libraries the size of planets. And they had never, not once, asked humans for help with anything important. Humans were useful for small things. They were good at fighting, which made them valuable as soldiers. They were surprisingly creative, which made them useful for certain kinds of art and entertainment. They adapted quickly to new environments, which made them good colonizers for difficult worlds. But science, real science, the elder species had always made it clear that humans were too young, too primitive, and too chaotic to contribute anything meaningful to galactic knowledge. So why were they asking now? The answer came a week later, when a representative named Nine arrived at the directorate to explain the project in person. They were one of the oldest species in the galaxy. They looked like large insects with too many legs and eyes that seemed to see through walls. They communicated through a membrane that translated their thoughts directly into words. They were very, very smart. And they were clearly not happy to be here. "We have studied the mysteries for 6 million years, Nine explained to the gathered scientists. We have used our greatest minds. We have built machines specifically designed to solve these problems. We have shared information with every civilized species in the galaxy." She paused, and her translator membrane made a sound that might have been a sigh. "We have failed completely." The mysteries, she explained, were 3 ancient puzzles that no one had ever solved. The first was the silence of Sector 7. This was a region of space containing over 40,000 worlds that should have been perfect for life, but no signals had ever come from there. No ships had ever returned from there. Probes sent into the sector simply stopped transmitting the moment they crossed the boundary. Something was wrong with that part of space, but no one knew what. The second was the builders' graves. These were enormous structures that orbited dying stars throughout the galaxy. They were clearly artificial, clearly made by some incredibly advanced civilization, but no one knew who had built them or why. The builders, as they were called, had left no other trace of their existence. Just these strange, silent structures, endlessly circling their ancient suns. The third was the recurring pattern. This was a sequence of symbols that appeared in the ruins of every civilization that had ever discovered faster-than-light travel. Every single one. The pattern was carved into stones, written in books, encoded in computer systems, and even built into the very genes of some species. But no one knew what it meant or why it kept appearing. Elder species had spent millions of years trying to solve these mysteries. They had dedicated whole generations to the problem. The crystalline Moor had spent 300,000 years studying a single builder's grave. The mathematical had built computers the size of moons to analyze the recurring pattern. None of them had found anything useful. "So you want humans to try," said slowly, "because we might see something you missed." Nine's many eyes focused on her. We want humans to try because you think incorrectly." There was a moment of silence in the room. "I am not insulting you," the continued, though her tone suggested otherwise. "Human cognition is unusual. You make connections between things that are not connected. You guess without evidence. You follow feelings instead of logic." "That sounds like an insult," one of the other scientists muttered. "It is simply a fact. Your species is young. Your minds have not yet learned to think properly." Nine's membrane rippled. "But we have tried proper thinking for 6 million years. Perhaps it is time to try something else." Understood then. The Galactic Research Council was not giving humans this grant because they respected human science. They were giving it because they had completely run out of other options. They were desperate. And desperate people, or desperate aliens, would try anything. The team was assembled over the following months, would lead the project, focusing on the archaeological aspects of the mysteries. Dr. Samuel, a theoretical physicist from Nigeria, would handle the scientific analysis. Doctor, a linguist and pattern recognition specialist from India, would study the recurring pattern. And then there was a science fiction writer. He had no scientific degrees. He had never published a research paper. He had spent most of his career making up stories about aliens and space travel. When the directorate suggested adding him to the team, the observers nearly shut down the entire project. "This is absurd," 12 said. "He is not even a scientist. He is an entertainer, a maker of fiction." "That's the point," the directorate's representative explained. "You asked for humans who think differently, thinks more differently than anyone we know." It took weeks of arguing, but eventually they agreed. They clearly thought the whole project was a waste of time anyway. What difference did one more strange human make? The team gathered for the first time in a small research facility in Geneva. They were given access to databases that no human had ever seen before. Millions of years of research, billions of failed theories, more information than any human could read in 1,000 lifetimes. And buried in the orientation materials, almost hidden in the technical details, was a warning. Found it late one night when she could not sleep. A statistical note in a report that was older than Earth itself. Every species that had seriously investigated all three mysteries together had gone extinct within a few generations. She read the statistic again. She checked the methodology. She looked at the list of species that had tried, 47 civilizations spanning 10 million years of galactic history. All of them dead. She should have told the others immediately. She should have stopped the project. She should have demanded more information from the. But she did not do any of those things. Instead, she sat in the dark and thought about what kind of puzzle could kill entire civilizations. And she wondered if the Galactic Research Council knew exactly what they were asking humans to do. The next morning, she gathered her team and told them what she had found. They sat in silence for a long moment. "So we might die," Samuel said finally. "All of us, everyone on Earth maybe." "Yes. And they know this. They must." Leaned back in his chair and smiled his strange, crooked smile. "Then we better solve it before whatever killed all those other civilizations comes for us." Stared at him. "You cannot possibly be serious." "I'm always serious," said. "Also, I'm always curious. And right now, I'm very curious about what kind of mystery is so dangerous that just looking at it kills people." He pulled out a notebook and a red pen. "Let's get started." Part 2. 18 months passed. The team worked every day, sometimes through the night. They read ancient records and studied alien data. They argued with each other and with their observers. They made progress, but slowly, so slowly that sometimes wondered if they were moving at all. Then did something that changed everything. He walked into the main research room one morning with a stack of printed images, a roll of tape, and a ball of red string. Without saying a word, he began sticking pictures to the wall. Photos of builders' graves, maps of Sector 7, drawings of the recurring pattern, news articles and research papers and pages torn from his own notebooks. Then he started connecting them with string, drawing lines between images that seemed to have nothing to do with each other. 12, who was observing that day, made a sound that the translator membrane could not interpret. It sounded like something between disgust and horror. "What is he doing?" she demanded. "I think he's making a conspiracy board," said slowly. "A what?" "It's a human thing. When we're trying to solve a complex problem, sometimes we put all the pieces on a wall and look for connections visually." "That is not methodology," 12 said. "That is decoration. It is pattern matching contaminated by human bias. It is exactly the kind of illogical thinking that makes your species inferior." Did not even look at her. "Yep," he said cheerfully, and drew another line with his red pen. For weeks, nothing seemed to come of his wall. The observers wrote reports about human irrationality. The directorate sent worried messages asking about progress, began to wonder if the project would be shut down before they found anything at all. But the other team members had been working too, had noticed something strange about the recurring pattern. Previous researchers had found pieces of it all over the galaxy, carved into ruins and encoded into ancient computers. But the pieces were never complete. Each location had only part of the pattern, never the whole thing. Everyone had assumed this was because of time. Information gets lost over millions of years. Carvings wear away. Computers break down. It made sense that only fragments would survive. But did not accept this explanation. She was a linguist. She had spent her life studying how languages and symbols spread through cultures, and something about the pattern's distribution did not feel right to her. She spent 6 months mapping every known fragment of the recurring pattern. She marked where each piece was found, how complete it was, and how it related to other pieces. And she discovered something remarkable. The fragments fit together like a puzzle, not randomly, like you would expect from natural decay, but precisely, as if they had been designed to connect. But they only fit together if you gathered pieces from different parts of the galaxy. It was separated on purpose, told the team. Someone took the complete pattern and broke it into pieces and scattered those pieces across the galaxy. They hid different parts on different worlds in different civilizations, thousands of light years apart. "Why would anyone do that?" Samuel asked. Shook her head. "I don't know yet, but whoever did it was very careful. They made sure no single species could find all the pieces on their own. You would have to search the entire galaxy to put it back together." While was studying the pattern, Samuel had been working on the builders' graves. The graves were strange structures. They orbited dying stars and seemed to convert stellar energy into something else. But the output did not match any known physics. Energy went in, but what came out was not energy or matter or anything that could identify. Previous researchers had focused on this mystery. What was the grave's output? What were they creating? But Samuel was a physicist, and he thought like a physicist. He did not just look at what the machines produced. He also looked at what they discarded. Every machine creates waste. Every process has byproducts. The builders' graves were no different. They produced small amounts of exotic particles that previous researchers had dismissed as noise, unimportant side effects of whatever the graves were really doing. Samuel studied these particles for months, and one night very late he saw the pattern. The particles were not random. They were organized. They pulsed in specific sequences that repeated every few hours. The sequences had structure and rhythm. The builders' graves were not just machines. They were transmitters. They were sending signals, endlessly broadcasting into space. And all of them, every single grave scattered throughout the galaxy, was aimed at the same destination. Sector 7. "They're calling someone," Samuel said when he presented his findings. Or something. The graves have been broadcasting into the silence for millions of years. Getting any response? Asked. No, nothing at all, just silence. Felt a cold weight settle in her stomach. The pieces were starting to connect, and she did not like the picture they were forming. She went back to the oldest archives, records so ancient that even they had forgotten where they came from. She read documents in languages that had no living speakers, using translation algorithms that were barely reliable. And she found the warning. It was repeated hundreds of times in dozens of different languages, all saying the same thing. Do not assemble the sequence. Do not complete the call. They are not gone. They are waiting. She brought the warning to the team. They gathered in the research room, surrounded by data and papers and its wall of red string. The builders didn't build graves, said slowly. They built transmitters. They're calling into Sector 7 trying to reach someone, but whoever they're calling isn't answering. Because they're gone? Samuel asked. No, felt sick. Because they're locked away. Sector 7 isn't empty. It's a prison. Something is in there and the builders sealed it in. Everyone was quiet for a moment. The recurring pattern said, it's a key, isn't it? That's why it was scattered across the galaxy. That's why each civilization only gets a piece. To make sure no one could put it together by accident, agreed. Walked to his wall and pulled down several images. He rearranged them, connecting new lines with his red string. When he stepped back, the pattern was clear. The builders had created a lock. Something ancient and terrible had been sealed inside Sector 7, cut off from the rest of the galaxy. The builders had sacrificed themselves to close the door. But they had also left behind the graves, still calling into the darkness. And they had scattered the key, breaking it into pieces that would only come together if many civilizations worked together. Why would anyone do that? The answer came too slowly, like a shape emerging from fog. They knew the lock wouldn't last forever, she whispered. They knew someday something would go wrong, so they left behind a way to fix it, but they made it hard. They made sure only species who were smart enough, who worked together, who understood what they were dealing with, could find all the pieces. And every species that tried, Samuel began, died, finished. Because once you start looking for all the pieces, once you start putting the pattern together, whatever is locked in Sector 7 notices, and it does something to stop you. The room was very quiet. So what do we do? Asked finally. Smiled his strange smile. We do what the builders wanted. We find all the pieces. We put together the key, and then we figure out what they actually wanted us to do with it. That will kill us, 12 said. She had been listening silently from the corner. Every species that has tried this path has been destroyed. Every species that has tried this path has tried it alone, said. We're human. We don't do things alone. He picked up his red pen and started drawing new lines. Part 3. Knew they had to tell the Galactic Research Council what they had found. She put together a careful report, full of evidence and logical arguments. She showed how all the pieces fit together. She explained the danger and the opportunity. The council did not believe them. The response came within a week. Human researchers had made interesting observations but had failed to properly analyze the data. Their conclusions were based on intuition and pattern matching rather than rigorous methodology. The report would be archived with all the other failed attempts. The grant was ending. The team would be disbanded. Humanity's chance to solve the mysteries was over. Stood in the research room with her team and stared at the rejection letter. They're going to ignore us, Samuel said quietly. They're just going to pretend we didn't find anything. Because they're scared, said. They've been studying these mysteries for millions of years. They've built their entire scientific culture around them. And now we're telling them that the answer is something terrible, something dangerous. They don't want to believe it. Was packing back and forth. So what do? We can't force them to listen. We're just humans. We're the youngest species in the galaxy. Picked up a pen and started tapping it against his notebook. The council is made up of old species, powerful species, species that have been in charge for so long they've forgotten what it's like to be questioned. And there are other species out there, young ones, species that have never been invited to the council, species that the old powers ignore. He smiled. Species like us. Understood what he was suggesting. You want to release the findings publicly, share everything we've discovered with the whole galaxy. That's treason, Samuel said. We sign treaties. There are laws about classified information. There are also laws about not deliberately allowing entire civilizations to be destroyed, replied. The Council knows the mysteries are dangerous. They've known for millions of years, and they never told anyone. The debate lasted 3 days. They talked about risks and consequences. They considered alternatives. In the end, it was who made the final decision. She released the report, all of it, every piece of evidence, every conclusion, every warning. She sent it to news networks and science journals and independent researchers across the galaxy. Within hours, humanity was officially censured by the Galactic Research Council. They were stripped of trading rights, scientific access, and diplomatic protections. The representative declared that humans had proven themselves untrustworthy and primitive. But it was too late to stop the information from spreading. Young species across the galaxy read the human research and started asking questions. Independent scientists began checking the work. The more, despite their alliance with the Council, quietly shared their own data about the builders' graves. A consortium of minor species in the outer rim started mapping their local fragments of the recurring pattern. Within a year, everything the human team had found was confirmed. The pattern was a key. The graves were transmitters. Sector 7 was a prison. And then, for the first time in recorded galactic history, something answered. It was not a message. It was a feeling, a pressure, a sense that something vast and old had noticed the galaxy and was paying attention. Across thousands of worlds, sensitives and telepaths woke screaming. The crystalline more shattered into fragments. The hive minds fragmented into chaos. Species that had never believed in the supernatural suddenly knew with absolute certainty that something terrible was watching them. Panic spread through the galaxy. Ships fled populated areas. Governments collapsed. The Galactic Research Council, which had spent millions of years maintaining order, simply stopped functioning. And in the middle of all this chaos, the humans kept working. Had added something to his red string wall months ago, a connection that even his teammates had dismissed as fantasy. He had linked the builder's lock to an obscure branch of human mathematics, a type of abstract pattern theory that existed only in theoretical papers. Now Samuel ran the numbers, and they worked. The human mathematics described something the builders had known, a way to manipulate the same forces that powered the lock. Found the next piece in human mythology. Stories about old gods and sealed doors appeared in cultures all over Earth. Tales of heroes who had locked away monsters and paid terrible prices to keep them contained. These were not just stories. They were instructions, passed down through hundreds of generations in the form of legends and fairy tales. Found the final piece in Earth's own archaeological record. A pattern carved into stone 20,000 years ago by humans who had lived before recorded history. The same pattern that appeared in every civilization that achieved faster-than-light travel. Humans had encountered the builders before, or rather, the builders had encountered humans long ago when humanity was still young, and they had left something behind, a gift, a message, a piece of the key that only humans carried. The builders didn't just lock the door, said slowly as the pieces came together. They knew the lock would eventually fail. Nothing lasts forever, so they left behind a way out. Not a key to open the door, added. A key to open a different door, an exit. An escape route, Samuel said, for whatever is locked inside. Nodded. The builders knew you couldn't keep something imprisoned forever. Eventually it would break free. So they built an alternative, a pathway to somewhere else. And they scattered the instructions across the galaxy, hoping that someday someone would be smart enough to put them together. Why us? Asked. Why would they give part of the key to humans? We weren't even civilized yet. Shrugged. Maybe they saw something in us. Maybe they knew we'd be the ones crazy enough to actually try. Maybe they just needed somewhere to hide it. It did not really matter. What mattered was that they had the complete picture now. They understood what the builders had wanted. The team worked for weeks to prepare the counter-sequence. It was incredibly complex, combining human mathematics with builder technology and fragments of the recurring pattern from across the galaxy. Young species sent their pieces of the pattern. Scientists from dozens of worlds contributed their knowledge. For the first time in galactic history, civilizations actually worked together. When the sequence was ready, transmitted it towards Sector 7. Nothing seemed to happen at first. The pressure remained. The watching presence continued to fill the minds of every sensitive being in the galaxy. Then slowly something changed. The pressure began to shift. The attention that had been focused on the galaxy turned toward something else, something new, a door that had not been there before. The watching presence moved. It did not disappear entirely. It simply went somewhere else, somewhere beyond the galaxy, somewhere that the builders had prepared millions of years ago. The silence of Sector 7 remained silent, but it was a different kind of silence now, an empty silence, a safe silence. The galaxy had been saved. In the months that followed, everything changed. The Galactic Research Council was reorganized. Young species were given seats at the table. Humans, despite their official censure, were recognized as the ones who had solved the unsolvable. 9 visited the human team one final time. She stood in their small research room, surrounded by papers and data and its wall of red string. We have studied the mysteries for 6 million years, she said. We used our greatest minds. We followed perfect methodology, and we failed. She paused, her many eyes focusing on each human in turn. You succeeded in 2 years, with primitive intuition, with illogical connections, with a science fiction writer drawing lines on a wall. Does that bother you? Asked. 9 was quiet for a long moment. Yes, she admitted. It bothers me greatly. We spent millions of years certain that we knew the correct way to approach problems, and then you proved us wrong. She turned toward the door, then stopped. But I am also grateful. You saved us all. Perhaps being bothered is a small price to pay. After she left, the team sat together in silence. So what now? Asked finally. The mysteries are solved. The council has been reformed. We're heroes. Smiled his strange smile. Now we find new mysteries. There's a whole galaxy out there. Who knows what else the builders left behind? Samuel laughed. You're already thinking about the next project, aren't you? Always. Picked up his red pen. That's what humans do. We solve one problem and start looking for the next one. Thought about everything they had been through. The fear and the hope. The moments when she had been certain they would fail. The moment when everything came together. Humans were young. Humans were chaotic. Humans made illogical leaps and drew connections that didn't make sense. But maybe that was exactly what the galaxy needed. Maybe the elder species, with all their wisdom and methodology, had been missing something simple, something obvious. Sometimes you needed someone who didn't know the rules, someone who would look at an impossible problem and say, "What if we try this instead?" She looked at her team, At with his red pen and with her pattern maps and Samuel with his physics equations. They had answered the door. They had solved the unsolvable. And the galaxy would never look at humans the same way again.